Reassessing Immortality, the Makropulos Case Revisited from the Good, the Right, Life and Death, ed. Richard Feldman, Chris McDaniel, Jason R. Rabley, and Michael J. Zimmerman, Aldershot Ashgate Publishing, 2005, pages 220 to 40. Not to put too fine a point on it, Bernard Williams does not think that immortality is a good idea. He itemizes his grounds for this conclusion in his well-known essay The Makropulos Case Reflections on the Tedium of Immortality. Its title, he reports, derives from a play-by which tells of a woman, alias Emilia Marty, alias Elian McGregor, alias a number of other things with the initials M, on whom her father, the court physician to a 16th-century emperor, tried out an elixir of life. At the time of the action she is aged 342. Her unending life has come to a state of boredom, indifference, and coldness. Everything is joyless, in the end it is all the same, she says, singing and silence. She refuses to take the elixir again, she dies, and the formula is deliberately destroyed by a young woman among the protests of some older men. 82 Williams' aims in his essay are twofold. First, he wants to argue that, although death is not necessarily an evil inter alia, because death can put a welcome end to intense and unbearable suffering, but also because, as M's case perhaps suggests, it can be a good thing not to live too long. 83 Nevertheless, other things being equal, death is reasonably regarded as an evil. 82 But second, and more importantly, he wants to argue that the bleak outcome of M's father's experiment is precisely what we could and should have expected it to be, i.e., that it was not a peculiarity of M's that an endless life was meaningless. 83 Rather, he claims, from facts about human desire and happiness, and what a human life is, it follows that immortality would be, where conceivable at all, intolerable. 82 Here I shall offer reasons for believing that neither of these conclusions is correct. There is, I shall argue, nothing in general to be said about whether death per se is a good or an evil, nor are there any compelling grounds for such thoroughgoing pessimism about the prospective trajectory of an unending human life. On the face of it, Jorge Luis Borges also endorses Williams' second conclusion. His prospective immortal is Joseph Cardophilius, ne Marcus Flaminius Rufus, a Roman soldier who, during the reign of the Emperor Diocletian, sought and found and drank from the secret river which cleanses men of death. In Borges' story, the company of immortals who remain in the region of this secret river have been reduced to apathetic bestiality. Eons earlier they built and inhabited a glorious city, only later to raze it and replace it with a bizarre labyrinthine parody. Long ago they abandoned its ruins as well, and they now live in caves as primitive and inarticulate troglodytes. Cardophilius is one of the few who can conceive of a goal still worth pursuing, the search for a second secret river whose waters would remove the immortality bestowed by the waters of the first, and, in Borges' story, he indeed finds and drinks from it, making it possible for death finally to bring to an end a life history spanning more 1600 years. These and other imaginative literary exercises make it clear that any discussion of the risks and rewards of immortality needs to begin with a specification of the sort of immortality one has in mind. A potentially endless trajectory of physical and mental deterioration, for instance the apparent fate of Jonathan Swift Strelbergs, plainly holds no attraction. Any immortality seriously worth considering will be one which, like that bestowed on M or Joseph Cardophilius, at least allows for continuous undiminished physical good health, and unimpaired mental acuity. M is 342 years old at the time described in Capek's play, because she was 40 when, 300 years earlier, she drank her father's elixir of life. Hers is a temporary but renewable immortality. Each dose of the elixir confers 3 centuries of life. After 300 years, she faces a decision. If she fails to take positive action, i.e., another dose of the elixir, a normal death ensues. Cardophilius, in contrast, is a durable but reversible immortality. Once he has drunk from the first secret river, he is potentially immortal forever. Immortality becomes, so to speak, the default condition. Unless he takes positive steps to end it, i.e., finds and drinks from the second secret river, life persists. but there is a second river, and so, at least in principle, he can end it. But surely he can also end it, and so could already have ended it in other ways. Although neither Capek nor Borges addresses the question, we can suppose that neither him nor Cardophilius is indestructible, an odd fate shared by the narcissistic rivals Madeline and Helen, played by Meryl Streep and Goldie Hawn, in the 1992 film Death Becomes Her. The potent elixir drunk by both of these characters initially confers youth and beauty, but, curiously, not precisely immortality. Instead, the two ultimately become nearly impervious zombies, de facto technically biologically dead, and, indeed, decaying, but still persistently sentient, animate, and competitive. It seems reasonable to posit, in contrast, that an encounter with a guillotine, or a suitably powerful explosive could, and would put a permanent end to him's or Cardophilius' history, quite independently of whatever benefits their life-prolonging drinks might have conferred. Any immortality seriously worth considering, in other words, would remain optional. By taking sufficiently drastic action, its beneficiary could always bring his or her life to a close. This arguably renders irrelevant the difference between him's temporary but renewable immortality and Cardophilius' durable but reversible immortality. In a sense, each of these potential immortals continuously faces a decision, indeed, the same decision. Each can always explicitly raise the question, why not end it here and now? The Roman philosopher Lucretius has two basic arguments for his argument that we should not fear death. The first argument seeks to interpret the fear of death as a confusion, based on the idea that we shall be there after death to repine our loss of the prima vitae, the rewards and delights of life, and to be upset at the spectacle of our bodies burned, and so forth. In his view, death is annihilation, so there cannot be any negative experiences. His second argument says that one will be the same time dead however early or late one dies, and therefore one might as well die earlier as later. And from both arguments he concludes that death means nothing, and should not matter to us. Indeed, we grow old and our powers decline. Much may happen to increase the reasons for thinking death a good thing. But these are contingencies. We might not age. If that were so, would it not follow then that, more life being per se better than less life, we should have reason so far as that one to live forever? And this brings us back to and the question of immortality. For, if, other thing being equal, death is a misfortune, then it looks as though it would not only be always better to live, but better to live always, that is, never to die. 89 we recall, was 342 because for 300 years she had been 42, and if one had to spend eternity at any age, Williams adds, that seems an admirable age to spend it at. 90 Her problem, he continues, was not that she was too old at the age she continued to be at. Her problem lay in having been at it for too long. Her trouble was, it seems, boredom, a boredom connected with the fact that everything that could happen and make sense to one particular human being of 42 had already happened to her. Or, rather, all the sorts of things could make sense to one woman of a certain character, for M has a certain character, and, indeed, except for her accumulating memories of earlier times, seems always to have been much the same sort of person. 90 The theme of boredom will become important later, but the first thing that needs to be noted is that what Williams offers is surely a peculiar interpretation of someone's continuing to be at a given age. There are, of course, people who, so to speak, get stuck at a given age, perpetual adolescents, for instance, whose interests and desires never manage to mature beyond those of a typical 19-year-old. But a general conclusion regarding the desirability of immortality can hardly be derived from considering such atypical cases of arrested development, and M seems to be just such a case. Not only does she continue to be physically one particular human being of 42, but evidently psychologically and emotionally as well, and while that is a perfectly acceptable literary conceit, it is surely neither inevitable nor plausible. M also appears to be utterly devoid of curiosity, at least curiosity about what the future might hold. There are also such people, of course, but that is clearly just another mere contingency, and so again not the sort of observation on which one could base the general conclusions that Williams wants to secure. Still, it is perhaps worth remarking, in an anticipatory way, that a healthy and robust curiosity is arguably one effective prophylactic against boredom. Novelty and curiosity complement one another in combating the encroachment of boredom. We are sometimes moved to try something new simply because we are curious about what it will be like. We become engrossed in a novel, a play, a film, inter alia, because we are curious about what will happen next and about how the characters, who may have become familiar to us, will react to and be affected by it. What intrigues us, what puzzles us, what engages our curiosity can also interest us, hold our attention, and become the focus of our activity. As we are in fact constituted, of course, we cannot actually explore every phenomenon that we find puzzling, or try out every form of activity that appeals to us. Our lives are too short for that, and so we need to set priorities, and make choices. But immortality removes just that limitation. An immortal could always sensibly enter a newly possible or newly salient project on his agenda for future attention, secure in the confidence that he will have time to get around to it, sooner or later. The most radical way to put an end to a stretch of boredom, of course, is to put an end to it all, that is, by taking sufficiently drastic action to put an end to a life which, although indefinitely extendable, always remains optional. If what I have so far argued is right, however, that could only be an irrational act of desperation, and one that was wildly disproportionate to what is actually appropriate in the circumstances. For even inevitable boredom is not necessarily irreversible boredom, and so here too especially an immortal can take solace in the thought that this too shall pass. The reminder that any reasonably coherent conception of corporeal immortality is the conception of a condition which can be terminated brings us back, finally, to the question of immortality itself. Offered a drink from M's elixir or Cardophilius' secret river, what decision do I actually confront? What do I choose if I decide to drink, and what if I decline? What could be, to use Williams' phrase, those aims that I have now in wanting to survive at all? 91 In short, if I desire immortality, just what is it that I want? As we are presently constituted, our individual futures are not open. In Heidegger's memorable idiom, we live toward our deaths. The fact that a human life is bounded at both ends, and has a roughly foreseeable duration limits our conception of what is possible for us, and for the others with whom we invariably interact, and so constrains both our rational anticipation of future circumstances, and the projects that we can reasonably envision, coherently plan to pursue, and sensibly undertake. Opting for immortality undoes those constraints. If I desire immortality, then what I want can only be such an open future, the option to continue to live for as long as I continue to want to live. As Williams points out, most people in fact mostly do continue to want to live, and I have argued that there is no a priori reason to suppose that this would necessarily change under conditions of immortality. It does seem plausible, however, that, given enough time, anyone will likely find some occasion explicitly to confront the question, why not end it here and now? And so to make a deliberate decision about the matter. And the important thing to see at this point is that, if and when, for whatever reason, the question becomes salient, all that one needs in order to decide to carry on is an answer that is good enough for here and now. This is simply a matter of keeping one's quantifiers in good order. Whether or not I am potentially immortal at any given time, I may need some reason not to end my life then and there. But it does not follow that I ever need some one reason never to end my life, i.e., not to end it at any time. And it certainly does not follow that I need such an expansive, durable, wholesale reason in order rationally to opt for immortality, i.e., to choose an open future here and now. Williams is right, that is, to insist that corporeal immortality would not dissolve the connections among desire, experience, and character, and so could not exempt one from living a human life. His mistake, I have argued, lay in supposing that, in choosing immortality, a person necessarily chooses to perpetuate himself as he is then, and there, to project both his present categorical desires, and his present particular character across an endless future. What is at stake in immortality, however, is not an endless future, but only an open one, and opting for an open future is not making an eternal commitment. It only removes some of the many constraints of finitude, but the others still remain. Even a potentially endless human life must still be lived one day at a time, and sufficient unto each day are the desires and decisions thereof. The choice to accept the proffered drink is ultimately just one more such decision, but I am now in a position to conclude, contrary to Williams, that there is everything to be said in favor of making it. For, as we have seen, at best, it liberates, and, even at worst, it does not compel. At worst, opting for immortality could only someday turn out to have been a mistake, and if it ever did, then it would always still be possible to correct it.